I need pecker. I need pecker. That sounds very bad, but I do. I do need pecker.
You heard it here first,
Um,
folks.
Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of The Physical Cut, where films live beyond the screen. My name is Carlos, and today I am joined here by Derick McDuff, host of the Underrated Movie Podcast. How are you today, Derick?
I am doing well. I am excited to be here and to be talking some physical media.
Today we're gonna have an interesting conversation because today I have what I consider one of the experts on Criterion because your background is recommending people Criterion. You have background, your expertise, I would say, because we kind of shared a similar job position once, but you have great knowledge when it comes to Criterion. If you would like to explain a little bit about your background when it comes to Criterion.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I host the Underrated Movie Podcast where I talk about underrated movies and at least how Criterion started with the core idea of finding underseen gems. I have that in common, but what you mentioned that we have in common is that my day job when I'm not being a podcaster is that I work at Barnes Noble, and they are, of course, as you mentioned, doing the Criterion Sale right now. So, every time around this year, I am out there in the streets helping people find their Criterion DVDs.
So you mentioned about the underrated podcast. There's always something interesting about finding an underrated gem, an underrated film. And your podcast focuses on that. I started listening to your podcast and I mentioned to you that there's some films that I heard of that I never seen. Can you give me a brief introduction on what your podcast focuses on? What kind of movie do you like hunting for? And what's like the excitement of discovering something that is so underrated?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I love finding movies that need champions. The pitch line is always movies that are underrated, underappreciated, and under the radar. So it could be really any of those things where it could be a movie that maybe a lot of people know about, but it got trashed by critics at the time or didn't do well at box office. Or it could be something that is just an unseen gem. And I love finding these movies that, for whatever reason, didn't get the respect they deserve. The first movie I ever covered on that show was Speed Racer, which is a movie that got absolutely trashed at the time. But I was just like, this is a masterpiece. From day one, I was like, this is such a good movie. And I have always been out there in telling people, hey, you've got to watch this movie. And that movie has really, even since I started the show in 2019, it's had such a resurgence, and it's been so cool to see people really come around to this great movie and start to give it its respect. And that's what I aim to do with all of the movies that I cover on Underrated, is to champion these movies that, for whatever reason, aren't getting that respect and have an outlet to talk about why they're actually pretty great a lot of the time.
When I downloaded the podcast, I I saw just like a few titles because I was on the train and I just recently met you and we started talking about your podcast and that's how we ended up here talking today. But then when I had some signal, a bunch of other titles just downloaded, I was like, oh wow, like he's really been digging deep for a while now. So I was really surprised by that. From your point of view, obviously from your podcast, what have you learned from talking about movies consistently? Because you don't just do it on your day job, but now you're doing it also on your podcast.
Yeah, so I try to be as knowledgeable about film as I can, and a big way to do that is watching as much stuff as possible and watching things that are a little bit more obscure a lot of the time, things that will work for the podcast, not just watching The Godfather and Lord of the Rings, whatever the biggest movies are, but getting a little bit deeper and watching these deep cuts. And I think that you do learn a lot about filmmaking and the craft by watching things that are not from necessarily the masters, things that there might be sometimes rough around the edges, but they might be a little bit more real sometimes. And I also try to, as much as I can, learn about movies through other means. I read a lot of books on film. I think one of my favorite books on that I've ever read, I'll give you two really good books on film if people are looking to learn more about film, is In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch. That is, he's a film editor. He directed one movie ever, Return to Oz, which is a movie that I covered on my show. And watching that movie, that was a lot of fun, learning a lot about film because just the cinematography in that movie is just fascinating. It's just so crazy that they were able to shoot that thing in the 80s. And the other book that I want to recommend is from screenwriter William Goldman called Adventures in the Screen Trade. He's the screenwriter of movies like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Princess Bride, All the President's Men, all these other masterpieces. And that is just a really fascinating look at Hollywood. It's written like a novel. He was a novelist originally, but it's also just teaches you about screenwriting and the way it works. So I definitely recommend if anybody's looking to know more about movies, A, watch movies, but B, use other resources like that. There's plenty of incredible video essays on YouTube that will teach you about movies as well. So I feel like learning about the craft when it comes to film is something that I've really picked up on in doing this show.
All the book, I'm not too sure if that's the one that has like the entire script of Butch Cassidy
Yes,
in it.
that is the one.
It's right here under my desk. I know that book. It's actually a pretty good book. I started reading that book. It's a pretty interesting book. I love the way that it's written. I also love Stephen King's on writing. If you're a horror fan, definitely on writing is a good one. But this is not your first rodeo with recommending films to people or helping people discover films, because at this point we're not shoving the films down your throat. We're kind of helping you discover films, especially if you're new, not just to Criterion, but into film watching or the film culture. But your experience also has mojo behind it. You have a little mojo in your background. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I also write for freelance for WatchMojo. I've been doing that for almost a decade now. There's a lot of things I write for about them, but usually it's film subjects. And so if people are familiar with WatchMojo, we do top 10 lists. So I have a lot of fun writing about those and researching those. And essentially the process with that is I will come up with my list. I will send it, like it could be, let's say one I wrote was top 10 sword fights in film. And so I thought about all the greatest sword fights. I looked up some of the lists. I did a lot of research, rewatched some stuff, rewatched all the scenes, and then collaborated with the people at the company and worked together to make a top 10 list of the greatest sword fights. And that was so cool because I'm a big fan of that kind of cinematic storytelling, that the way that you can take two characters and have them just have a fight, but it will teach you, just these physical actions will teach you about who their characters are. Like a great example is Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one, right? I love recommending that movie because that is a movie where there is so much done just with not necessarily words or dialogue, but just the way that characters move, characters react to one another, the way characters will plan something out, will think about something. And that sword fight at the beginning of the movie between Jack Sparrow and Will Turner tells you everything you need to know about these two people. And so getting to make these lists where you take all this stuff from film and might recommend, it might be like a top 10 movies or might be top 10 scenes or genres or something like that. Getting to write these lists has been so much fun and so rewarding because, and sometimes it's stuff you wouldn't expect. On that list, I had the sword fight at the end of Shanghai Nights, which is not, I think, typically thought of as this great sword fight from cinema, but I think it's great. It really is this kind of piece of emotional, the emotional climax of the movie while also being a great action scene. Seeing Jackie Chan in a sword fight is also very cool, something you don't typically associate with him. He's usually doing more martial arts-based stuff. So getting to do something that is a little bit more off the beaten track and recommend something like that is always a blast.
I mean, I'm hoping that Confident Tiger Hidden Dragon is on that top 10.
It was indeed.
Oh, there we go. See, it has to be. It has to be. But we always see the list of 10,000 ways to woo your man, but which, by the way, I never get through just because like there's so many ads on those. I do like the Mojo ones. They're easier to get through. But why do you think these lists are so popular? At least like these movie lists.
I know me personally, I love a good list. That's why I write for WatchMojo. I think maybe part of it for me at least is there's a little bit of like neural spice of having I love to rank things, But it's also, I think, it's a really good way, like you said, to recommend stuff. It's a good way to take these things that you might want to tell people to like be interested or watch, people look at them for recommendations. But I think people also find a little bit of validation in seeing something that they like being ranked high up. They can be like, oh wow, this is my favorite sword fight. Like you would Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, you're like, okay. You would say you watch the list, you see it come up, you're like, very good. Okay, my favorite is on the list, and then you get to hear, whatever I or whoever is making the list has to say about it, and then you might be like, okay, well, this is my favorite. What beat it, and why did it beat it? I'm really curious to hear about that. So I think that list making, it's also a way to just talk about these different aspects of film. And so it's on one level, it's like, okay, here's like just 10 movies, but you're also looking into, well, why does this sword fight work in this scene? Why does this one work in this scene? What is this telling you? Something that the other sword fight wasn't telling. So it's also giving you different aspects of why things work. Just 10, it's giving you essentially, like if it's a top 10 list, it's giving you 10 different things that you can take away from the movie.
Well, and again, this does help because my other question, you kind of answered it a little bit there, was, do these rankings actually help other people discover films?
I think that they really do. I think that if you listen to a top 10 list, you only know 5 of them. You're like, okay, well, what are those other 5 that they were talking about? This might be one I've never heard of before. This might be one that I've always kind of thought, oh, maybe I'll watch it someday. Oh, but now they recommended it here on this top 10 list. It's number 3. It must be pretty good.
No, I agree. There's a few ranking videos, at least on YouTube, that I watch. One of the most famous that I watch, at least on YouTube, at least for us over here in film, especially the horror culture, is Cobweb channel. He does some very good top 10s, top 20s, top 30s. But I do enjoy the vibe. I do enjoy a lot of his recommendations. As a matter of fact, sometimes when I'm choosing films or when I'm browsing films in stores, I see a film that he recommended. I'm like, I just grab it. I'm not saying he has the last say on what's good, what's not, but it's something I did not know about. And he does like the little trailers of the films. So it kind of helps you visually. And the same thing that you mentioned, you do these sword fights that people know about, or you do this top 10 insert situation here, and people see that. People discover it also visually, which, that's what films are. You're meant to discover them visually. And I feel like I've discovered a lot of films that way, especially when it comes to horror. I have discovered a lot of films that way. You have a multiple variety of audience. How do you recommend to different audiences? How does your brain kind of adjust who you're talking to?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I love pretty much like think any genre can work as long as it's made well. And I know that people have their specific tastes, and so I try to be as knowledgeable about every kind of genre as possible. I didn't get into horror until later in life, but now I've gotten a lot more into it, and I can talk more intelligently about the conventions and the tropes of horror films. And I think when it comes to finding top 10s, finding reviews, people will find someone that they tend to vibe with, that they tend to agree with, that they at least understand, they're on the same wavelength as, and just kind of, regardless of genre, will go off of their recommendations a lot of the time. And so I think that's been the way with myself and film critics that I've looked up to. I hope that when people listen to Underrated, they can hear my recommendations and know that I'm a knowledgeable, good source on these things. And if I'm not talking about it, for example, people who listen to my show who they never like horror stuff, right? But they still might listen to my episode on horror because they're like, okay, well, this is an interesting take. I kind of want to still hear about this movie without having watched it. There is, I think, an entire podcast that actually has that premise. I think it's called Too Scary Didn't Watch, where they review horror films for people who are too scared to watch horror films. So I think that as long as you're vibing with somebody and you're getting on their level and able to talk about films in a way they understand and appreciate, it doesn't have to be a genre that they will always relate to, and being diverse too. I think that I love talking about all kinds of different films, so I will cover all kinds of different films on my show.
There is a difference between recommending something that the person, because, for example, you might think that Citizen Kane is a great film, but the person that you're recommending it to might not really appreciate that film. So how do you go about recommending a great film to someone, whatever great film you think is, and recommending something that you think they might actually enjoy?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because I think there's a real big difference between a good film and a film that is recommendable, or a bad film and one I wouldn't recommend, because there's plenty of really great films that I might not recommend to everybody. And that's something that I will often bring up my podcast. It's almost like the thing of like, if this is a great movie, but you would recommend it to your parents. There's that thing of like, it's a different kind of thing, and we can still talk about it. It can still be good. And sometimes movies might be less good, but I'm like, this is going to be very palatable. This is palatable. This is a good movie for everyone to watch. This is something I can easily recommend. So I will often talk about that on my show, where it's like, okay, yeah, this is a good movie, but it might not be for everybody. I'll mention that. Or like, I don't know if this one worked for me, but it might work better for my guest. And we can talk about what aspects of it worked, what didn't, and why someone might like it or might not like it.
Like we said before, recommendations for you don't just happen online. And like we spoke at the beginning, you have your experience, your day job, as well as working at Barnes Noble, which is a whole different beast. And I should know how now during this time, because this is why we kind of got together to do this. During this time, it kind of sometimes looks like the first 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan when that clock hits midnight, and the next day, because I used to work on Fifth Avenue, the next day you have a line of people just lining up, and you know they're not here for the next Stephen King book or the next, what's his name, pops up a book every day. They're here because the Criterion Sale started. What is it like? Because I know what it is, but for our listeners, especially those who dare to go on the first day of the sale, how was it like to work at Barnes Noble doing the Criterion Sale?
Oh, it is absolutely nuts. The first thing to Saving Private Ryan is a good way to describe it. I've done a few of these now, and just the hordes of people that come in, it's all the movie fans, to use a somewhat derogatory term, all the movie bros coming in, trying to get the 4K of whatever niche thing that they love. It's a bit of nuts. We're getting online orders constantly, so we're always kind of like running out, like making sure, okay, let me grab this and be telling all the big booksellers, make sure you grab the 4K, not the Blu-ray, because they have the same cover, and if you get the wrong one, these film collectors will be very upset, rightfully so. It's a lot of just kind of batten down the hatches. This year it was interesting because I closed the night before the sale, so I was the one who was setting everything up, putting up all the signage, putting up multiple displays for it, because we just had so much stuff in preparation for it. And then by the time I came in the next day, I was closing again. So I'd missed the first rush of everything. And it was so completely, I'd say at least like a third of the stuff was gone from the stuff that I had set up the night before. So it was absolutely luck. People love this sale. And physical media hunters love Criterion discs. This is like, and I hear people all the time talking about like how like they've marked their calendars, they've been counting down the days. They always know when it's about. They're like, okay, is it start? They don't make the official announcement until right when it happens. So like, is it happening soon? So it gets wild.
I've been in that situation a couple of times. My expertise wasn't the film section, but I did work some mornings of the sale starting. And I'm telling you, I would pick up a 6 a.m. shift, and by 6:20, there would be already a line of people standing right outside. And we didn't open till 9.
Mhm.
So we kind of knew what was expected already. And sometimes it would have some of us go upstairs to just help out, because we only have one person in the movie section, just to like help out, to keep, or not just organizing, but stocking. It was fun. I ironically, when I used to work there, I wasn't a big Criterion collector. I had some Criterions. I think Dr. Strangelove was probably one of the first ones I bought. But I also bought the special edition that Criterion did of Night of the Living Dead.
Mm.
And that was like probably years later after it came out, or a year later, actually, I think it was, because it had a ticket inside for the re-release. I believe it was the
Oh,
50th
yeah.
anniversary. And it had a ticket for a free showing. And I did not know all that was in there because I had not opened it. So by the time I opened it, the anniversary was already done.
Oh.
The screening had already passed.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a great collector's item. It's actually a pretty big box, and I've shown it a couple of times on Instagram. It's a pretty good big box. It comes with posters, a massive book. Honestly, if anybody is a fan, not just of Criterion, but of Night of the Living Dead, that is probably one of the best editions. And I believe it's a 4K, but it's a little broken because it's so heavy. It's a little torn, but I would still never part with that. But going back to the sale, why do you think this has become such an event, especially for collectors?
Yeah. I think part of it is that Criterion discs are so expensive. For the standard price for like a Blu-ray, I think is $40. For a 4K, it's $50. Um, so I think that is definitely part of it. But I think it also has become like a thing of like, it's become like a, not virtue signaling isn't the right word, but it's become a way to be like, I'm a film buff. I care about movies. I care about physical media. I know you've talked about in your show, physical media is becoming more and more important, especially as companies are taking away options to do that. So, and they always are such incredible. Like you spoke so beautifully about how much that your disc means to you, how much that set means to you, because these are immaculately put together things. They always look so cool and so good. One of the first Criterions that I ever bought, it was during this sale, was for a Princess Bride, and I have an old Princess Bride DVD. It's still the same movie, right? But there's so many cool things that come in the box. Like there's all these great physical things. They always look so good. It's, you can build your collection up. And then also they come with such incredible features, right? They come with all this hours and hours of behind the scenes stuff, all these incredible tidbits that you would never get. Like I'm a big fan of the Blank Check podcast, and right now they're going through Andrew Stanton, and there's the Wally Criterion. And when they cover the Wally episode, Griffin, one of the hosts of the show, was talking about like all of this stuff that he gleaned from all these behind the footage, scenes things, footages from the Criterion disc. So if you are really passionate about a specific movie, I think that it will tell you so much about it. And it's a cool way to like be like, okay, cool. I have this one. I have for Princess Bride. I have the Elephant Man. I have whatever. And someone else might be like, okay, cool. Like I have this movie. I have this movie. And I think that's also why the Criterion Closet is so popular, is because you get to see these actors, directors, whoever it might be, go in, and it's almost like the list making thing where they're like pulling out movies and like, oh, I love this movie. This movie works because of this reason. Oh, here's this great Fellini movie. Here's the Red Shoes. It changed the way I watch it. And so you're getting recommendations. You're getting all this really cool behind the scenes info, and you're getting to be part of a club too.
I'm obsessed with watching the Criterion Classic videos. I'm just obsessed with them. And I also agree with you because if you love a director, and last week on the last episode of the Criterion recommendation that I did at the beginning of this sale, I did mention that I love John Waters, and the fact that John Waters has been coming into the Criterion Closet, I mean, not Criterion Closet, Criterion Collection. He did a Criterion interview, one of those sit down interviews that they do. That's on YouTube. And I was obsessed because, you know, he, and I don't want to disrespect any other director, but we kind of have seen some, and I know this is a tangent here, I know we've seen some new directors that I appreciate because they kind of have taken that John Waters route, which is like, well, this is a budget that I have. We got to make a masterpiece, what I consider a masterpiece, with this budget. And seeing Hairspray, seeing Desperate Living come into the Criterion Closet, it just gives me some hope that later on there will be a box set of John Waters, but that box set has to include Pecker, because again, I am going to die in that soapbox. I need Pecker. I need Pecker. That sounds very bad, but I do. I do need Pecker.
You heard it here first, folks.
But it is such a good film. I know John Waters growing up because I knew of Hairspray. Everybody knows The Bug Dress. And there was other films that you're not allowed to watch, but my mother let me watch anyway. That's how I discovered Eyes Wide Shut. But when I saw Pecker and I discovered that was John Waters, I was like, wait, I actually do like this guy. So I went back in his filmography and I started discovering other films and the way that he talks about them, and not just of his films, but everybody else's films. There's a level of respect, whether it's a masterpiece or just some trash. He always finds something good. And I always tell people, I don't really hate a film. I might not like it, but if it's your favorite film, I'm not going to hate on it just because I don't like it. I keep saying I don't really like Citizen Kane, and I might lose another listener, and that's totally fine because the only good shot in Citizen Kane is the window shot. I like Barry Lyndon. Stanley Kubrick is one of my favorite directors, top favorite directors. But do I love Barry Lyndon? God, no. It's not that it's an awful film, but besides every every scene is like a painting. Can you give me another argument besides that one? Because everybody gives you the same one. Now, can you give me another argument? Now, if you want to talk Eyes Wide Shut, we'll go there for hours and we'll come up with our own theories and whatnot. But there's something about Criterion that when you discover your favorite director and you start digging into their thoughts, their behind the scenes, and how they came up with these ideas, and then they sit down with the cast and all these conversations, the supplementals
Hmm.
are probably the best way to teach people, not just about their favorite films, but about films in general.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much like good stuff behind the scenes that get included on those discs. And I loved that you brought up your love for John Waters and like how some like his more low budget indie films are getting added to this, because I think there's a place in the Criterion Collection for there, like obviously with the Kubrick going in his whole section, there's big massive movies like 2001, but then there's also the weird low budget John Waters movies that are going in. So I think that there is a real, like, you can love as many movies as you want, and I also like what you said about never wanting to step on somebody else's favorites, right? Because that's one thing that I try to do always on Underrated is like there's unless a film is like morally objectionable, I won't sell people like, well, you shouldn't like this movie. I'm like, it doesn't work for me necessarily, but I'm glad that you like it. I'm glad that these things work about it for you. Like the only movies, and it's with on Letterboxd, the only movies that I'll give half a star are movies that I'm like, this is a bad movie morally. Something like Triumph for the Will or something. That's something I'm like, I don't like that movie. You shouldn't like it. But for 99 times out of 100, like just like what you like. Like even if something is not well made, or like the acting is off, or it was like kind of the studios ruined something. If something in that film clicks for a certain person, who am I to take anything away from that?
I meant to ask, do you, at least for, because you mentioned about some films that might be morally wrong, but I just see sometimes when I go in, because Criterion has a lot of controversial titles. And sometimes when you're getting into the collection or when you get into Criterion collecting, as a first time buyer or as a first time approaching Criterion, you have those titles are in behind the curtain. You got
Yeah.
the Sala and now Eyes Wide Shut, nicely joined by Sala. But how do you approach those first time buyers that don't know much of Criterion?
So I will say most of the people who are coming in for the Criterion Sale, a lot of times they are not first time buyers, especially the people who are like coming in and like hordes and stuff like that. Um, they know what they want, they know what they like. They're here for David Lynch or whatever it might be. But I will say sometimes after the sale's been going for a little bit, somebody sees Criterion and they're like, okay, I'm like, if they're like looking to get more into film, I would like recommend them stuff that is like good starters for it. I talked about David Lynch, right? I might recommend them something like The Elephant Man. I think that's a easier off on ramp to something like that, because it's still a very Lynchian film, and it's still like a Criterion film movie where it's like high art and kind of weird and made really well, but it is palatable to a mass audience. Where I think that I could recommend The Elephant Man to my mom, right? I cannot recommend Blue Velvet to my mom. So I think when it comes to first time buyers, to people looking to get like more into it or something like that, I recommend those titles. I also would recommend stuff that is like kind of some masterpieces of the collection that I think are maybe a bit underseen. Like I'll always ask people like, well, what are some movies that you like? And they might, let's say they give me an example. They're like, oh, well, I really like, I like Scream. And I'm like, okay, well then, you know what? Have you ever heard of Peeping Tom? This kind of like proto slasher from the 60s made by Michael Powell. That's in the collection. That one might be a really good one for you. So kind of like finding out what they like and making them a recommendation that they would be down for.
Well, at least throughout the years, is there's like a trend that you notice between the Criterion buyers?
I'd say the buyers, they're all a lot over the place. I think when the I would say one big trend is that sometimes there will be a new movie that comes out for the collection. Something like when Godzilla was like the 100th or the 1000th film, people were lining up for that. HUD just came out. People were clamoring for that. So I think a lot of the times people are looking for what's the new big thing.
I know Criterion now a little bit more as I collect, but I feel like for not just the first time buyers, but people who are slowly building their Criterion collection, I feel like social media has become a big drive to discover these films. And sometimes, like you said, they come in, they know what they're buying. I go in, and even when I know what I'm buying, I still end up buying something else that is not what I went for. But I also see sometimes the bad side of that, the influence that social media and YouTube is giving also a little bit of FOMO, and you kind of don't know where to balance that, especially if you're a new Criterion buyer, and you're like, oh, now I have to spend $300 on the sale because this guy over there said this thing, and this guy over there said I needed these other 10, and this one recommended another 20. How much does social media and online recommendations you think have influenced the buyers?
I think it definitely has. I think that there is a particular cult around certain directors, certain quote unquote auteurs that people are drawn to. With the Criterion stuff, it's less so of that than you would with like anything else, because I feel like with the Criterion buyers, it's a lot of people getting recommendations from their close friends, or if it is from social media, it's stuff that they trust a lot. It's like, okay, well, I really like this critic. He's talked very beautifully about this particular film. I'm going to buy and check it out. I know me personally, when I see something on social media or talk to somebody, they recommend a film, I won't buy a physical copy of something until I've actually seen it, because it's often a big investment. I love collecting physical media, but I want to actually collect the stuff that I know that I love. I will very rarely buy something sight unseen.
Sometimes when I want to see a film, I'd rather just buy it. They're not cheap, but even if it's a used version, for example, like if I see the 4K for $40 and I go to a used bookstore that they have DVDs or just a thrift store and I find it on DVD, I just go ahead and purchase it. I'm like, if I like it, I'll upgrade it later. There's a lot of DVDs that I have that look pretty good, and they'll stay as DVDs because I like them. I just don't need them on 4K. And I feel like you said, if you're interested in something and you're not too sure about it, let me watch it first, let me stream it. But I just have the most horrible experiences with streaming. That's not like I have all these streaming channels, all these streaming networks, and I hate streaming things because every time I sit down, it's just like, oh, my internet went out. And my internet is always working, except when I sit down and watch a movie. There's at least like sometimes when you're working, at least for me, I don't know your perspective on this, but I used to work in the book department. I was more of the expert when it came to current affairs and politics and history. I knew every book, I knew where they were, I knew everything. And for me, watching people, observing people, browsing titles, and you kind of want to jump in. You kind of like, no, don't go, don't grab that one, don't grab that one. I'll recommend you this one. And that is not just a bookseller perspective. It's also kind of your knowledge. My background is in politics, and I know how to be centered and unbiased. Obviously, sometimes I have my opinions, but I know how to talk to someone who's on either side. And you mentioned yourself just a few moments ago how you also have to put yourself in like, okay, I can recommend this to my mom, or I can't recommend this to my mom. There's a lot of books out there that when you're talking to someone who are either on either side of the aisle, you kind of want to give them something that is educated. You might be on that side, but you still gotta educate yourself.
Yes.
So that comes a lot also with films. Like you said, if you like Scream, you might like Peeping Tom. So one thing sometimes influences another, and I feel like browsing does give you a lot of ways to discover that streaming does not. And how do you approach that though? For somebody whose mentality, whose headspace is so in streaming, not just on the Nook, but also like on Netflix. How do you approach those people at a bookstore? Because it's a whole different mentality. Sometimes I don't even know how to speak to humans. It's like, hello, I am human. I am here to help you.
Well, you always got to be kind of diplomatic, right? Like if somebody's buying a DVD, I'm like, that's a horrible movie, and they're like talking about how much they love it. I'm like, oh, cool, yeah, that one's really popular, blah, blah, blah. You got to kind of choose your words carefully. Even if it's something you don't like, you haven't seen, whatever, you got to kind of like be like, but if you do see somebody that's like looking at something that's really good that you love, you might be like, okay, well, that's a great movie. And if they're asking you for your opinion between two, I will always give my honest one. But yeah, just like you said, maybe holding your tongue, like, because also you got to make the sales. You got to make sure that people aren't walking out empty-handed. And if somebody's looking to get something that maybe doesn't jive for you, like I said, it's like what I was saying before with the talk about the podcast. If it doesn't work for me, who am I to judge if you like it for whatever reason?
I feel like you said, at least like physical stores, they don't just create memories of going in and purchasing the title, especially if it's your first title, but they kind of help people, again, not just discover the one title, but discover multiple titles.
I think you have a really good point where you're saying like going to the store, seeing the physical things, browsing it that way is so different than just like looking for something to stream on Netflix, because you're making a much more like you're making a commitment, right? Whereas like streaming, you could just like turn off whatever, you're not spending $40. Whereas like you're actually buying something, and it's something that I feel like a lot of places have lost. I think there is a lot of nostalgia for these places like Blockbuster that don't exist anymore. You always see these posts on TikTok or whatever about like, oh man, I miss the days when you could walk into a Blockbuster video and look around for what movie you wanted to watch. And that's still, I think that's a big reason why the Criterion Sale is still so popular, is because people are getting to come in and look at all these great physical discs and be like, okay, do I want this one or this one? Oh, I didn't even know this was in the collection. I love this movie. Or what's this? I've never heard of this. So it is, I think, creating those memories, getting people to be more adventurous, and by building these collections, you can't just have like one or two Criterions, right? You're like, you've got a couple. It's like, okay, well, now I have a couple of these things. I love them so much. I want to get more. I'm going to get more adventurous. I'm going to buy some other ones that I might not have bought before. But now it's like the whole thing of in for a penny, in for a pound. You have started collecting. You're going to be really into this. You're going to start appreciating films. You're going to be watching these behind the scenes features, and you're going to really get a lot of film knowledge.
I totally agree with that. Before we close this Criterion talk, I'm going to put my Barbara Walter wig on, and I have some hard-hitting questions for you. You're basically the pusher. You have people going in for a crack, and you're the dealer. What's your advice for someone buying their first Criterion?
I would say buy something that you love. Find a movie that, don't just kind of like buy something because you've heard good things about it, that you think you might like. You can do that later on, but for your first one, like I think like I said, my first one was The Princess Bride. That is an absolute masterpiece of a movie, and there's plenty of deep cuts in the Criterion, but there are plenty of movies that are really just very popular. I guarantee you that one of your favorites is in the Criterion Collection, whether it's Godzilla or The Princess Bride or 2001 or whatever it might be. Find a movie that is very meaningful to you for your first one.
And when it comes to Criterion, what's one misconception about collecting that you think should change?
I think maybe a misconception is that you need to keep buying the more expensive version of whatever it is. I think that, like, I don't know that there is, like, if you have the Blu-ray already, I don't think you necessarily need to get the 4K unless it's a movie you're incredibly passionate about. You don't need 3 copies of the same thing because you had the DVD and you got the Blu-ray, and now you need to get the 4K because they're releasing the 4K. The Blu-ray is good enough, I would say.
2 films that you think, out of the top of your head, 2 films that if somebody walked in right now with $50, because that's all you get, what are those 2 films that you think a first-time buyer should, not just because of the preference, but that you think should be in their collection?
I would say The Red Shoes is one, because if you want to watch a movie that is just beautifully made, it encapsulates all the things that people who are buying Criterions love. It's the same film that was made by Michael Powell as a co-director on this one. It's as the Archers. He's one of the Archers. This piece of cinema history that just looks so beautiful, this technicolor masterpiece. It was restored by Martin Scorsese. That is a great film to watch. Especially if you haven't seen it, that's a great one. I would say that's one. For a second one, I'll say, you know what, go for something more populous and I'll say Godzilla, right? Godzilla, great monster movie, but also a great movie in general.
Yeah, I actually love that Godzilla film.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. I'm waiting for King Kong to make its way to the collection too.
That would.
Not the King Kong from the 70s or not the 50s, the 50, not the one with
Oh,
Jessica
yeah,
Lange.
yeah.
God, I hate that King Kong. My favorite one is the 30s and the remake later on in the 2000s.
Mhm.
Not Godzilla 2000. Don't get me wrong, not
Yeah,
that
no, no, no.
one. Why do you think that physical media still matters?
Because there's a lot of reasons, but I think the most important is this is yours forever now. This is something that you can have, that you can collect, that you can put on whenever you want, that no one can ever take away from you. Because when you're buying something digitally, you're just renting it, or when you're streaming it, they could take it off. This is something that you have forever that no one can take away from you. It's also really cool to have something, tangible in your hand. Be like, this is a movie that I love. Here it is. I'm holding it. It's got all these cool bells and whistles in it. So that's really cool. I also think that quality wise, it is you're gonna always get a lot better version when you're watching it off a disc than when you're streaming. You have to worry about compression and all this other stuff. So I think there are quite a few reasons, but I think the most important thing is this is yours. No one can take it away. If your internet goes out, cool. I remember when I first moved into my apartment, we had no internet set up for a couple days. I was like, all right, not a problem. I have a million DVDs. Let's pick one and let's watch some movies. And that having that connection to something physical, having it in your hand, putting it on your bookshelf, displaying it for people to see is really so important.
All right, Derek, thank you so much for that Criterion talk. So make sure that you pack your wallets, don't break bank, go grab those Criterions. Those that Derek recommended, I highly recommend too, not just because I'm a Godzilla fan, but it's just the film is so beautifully shot. The Red Shoes is beautifully shot. So I highly recommend those two as well. If you heard my episode on my top 10 Criterion recommendations, those are just recommendations that I think people should pay attention to and discover. They're totally underrated films. Some of them are known, like the Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is one of my favorite Criterion releases. Such a beautiful film. But I feel like those are films that are not really talked about. And I hope that if you bought them based on my recommendation, I hope you love them. If not, my name is Derek. But Derek, before we go, I have one more question for you.
The physical cut presents Scream at 30.
I've been asking movie collectors, I've been asking film aficionados, I've been asking moviegoers and anybody who lives and breathes, how do you feel about Scream? What influence, if any, has the film had on you?
So actually, I didn't watch the any of the Scream movies until relatively recently, a couple years back, because I was not a huge horror fan, not a huge slasher fan growing up. So, I never got around to watching this film that is kind of a deconstruction of that. And it's just because, yeah, like I would never cover Scream on the podcast, but I was doing a mini series on sequels. And so we're talking about like sequels that maybe deserve more love and attention. And I had a co-host on my show back in the day, and he was like, "Okay, well, let's talk about Scream 2," because he was like had an opinion that it's very underrated. So I was like, "Okay, well, if I'm talking about Scream 2, I of course have to watch Scream 1 first." Watch Scream 1. I thought it was great. I thought it was a great send up of those kind of films. Wes Craven kind of like going back to his roots and kind of like playing on all these tropes. I think that first scene where you think that the character who's going to be the main character or the final girl is actually just right away. I think that's a great twist. But I actually, when I watched Scream 2, for me, I thought Scream 2 was even better. I love Scream 2. I think it's a masterpiece. I'm a big Timothy Olyphant fan, so like seeing him show up in that as Mickey, I thought was incredible. I think that movie, the way it skewers specifically horror sequels, is so smart. I think it's a really interesting mystery because what I love about the Scream films is they are both slashers, but they're also whodunits, whereas there's a different ghost face every time, and you're always trying to figure out who the killer is. So it's got a bit of murder mystery in there with the horror. So I've And I eventually did watch Scream 3. I haven't seen anything past that, past the original trilogy. I think 3 doesn't hold up quite as well as those first two, for sure. Never really had any big incentive to go on beyond that, especially the more recent ones seem to be a little bit. The last one, people had a lot of feelings about that movie, and so I never really got around to watching the recent ones, but especially Scream 2 is such a good film.
I try to fight for justice when it comes to Scream 3. I feel like it's a film, it's one of the many of the 7 that it's always overlooked, but once you start getting into Scream and learning and just loving the series more, you kind of have a special place for Scream 3 because one is the only one that you only have one killer. And like I always say, I just love the family drama in that film. It's so stupid. It's so soap opera. It has a special place in my heart because Scream 1, I saw on VHS the first time. Scream 2, I also caught on VHS, and it wasn't my favorite. And then I saw Scream 3 in theaters. So you kind of remember your first.
Yeah.
And then so I that's why I'm like, I always fight the battle for that one. And I'm so glad that a lot of Scream fans are kind of going back and giving that one a second chance and a third chance just because the film has grown a little bit more popular lately. I'm not plugging anything here, and I don't want to have as good a producer title, but I think that you should cover Scream 3 because it is underrated.
I did like Scream 3. I did like it.
It is so campy. It's like, it's probably the film is already campy, the films, but I feel like that one is probably the campiest of all of them. But if you ever do cover Scream 3 and underrated, please send it to me. I want to be the first one to listen to it.
You got a deal.
But thank you so much, Derick, for being here today with me. Before you go, and I don't have no more questions for you, I swear. And you're not here because Nikki owes me a favor because I hooked it up with Bear. But before you go, I want you to tell people where they can find you, if you have any upcoming projects on your podcast, where they can listen. And I would also tag all that information here at the bottom for anyone who wants to discover highly underrated films.
Yeah, thank you. So however you are listening to this, we are on all the podcatchers. So I would love you to go and check us out. Just look up Underrated Movie Podcast on whatever app you're using to listen to this. You can also go to underratedmoviepodcast.com, which has links to the show and everything else surrounding it. Or just look up Underrated Movie Podcast on social media. That's how we are on all the social media sites, Instagram, Blue Sky, all that stuff. And then we are in the middle of a series right now talking about unreleased films. So films that are so underrated that most people cannot even watch them. So talking about movies that were either, some of them are like made for streaming services that then were taken down by the same streaming service. Talking about some silent film stuff that have been lost to time. And talking about like versions of films that were not allowed to be released by the studios, the directors that were hampered. So it's been a lot of fun getting to talk about those. So I'd love people to go check that out over at Underrated Movie Podcast.
Thank you so much, Derick, for being here today with me. I really appreciate all your teachings on Criterion and your point of view. That is something we really don't get from YouTube videos. And I really want to bring that to my audience. But I really appreciate you being here with me today. If you want to follow me, you can follow me at the Physical Cut Pod on Instagram. And you can also check out on my website, krpodlab, that's krpodlab.com. We do have a setting there that you can leave me a voicemail if you want to let me know what Scream means to you, your memories, your experience. If you hate it, you'll be deleted. But don't worry, I will still listen to it. Send me your thoughts on Instagram. If you want to be featured on any videos, you can send me your videos with your thoughts on Scream. Send me your film recommendations and your thoughts on physical media. I would love to read them here on the show. Thank you for listening to The Physical Cut, where films live beyond the stream, and I will see you guys next time.